I was still wearing black when I heard my son laugh. Not the kind of laugh you make at a memory. The kind you make when you think you've already won. "Don't worry," he said. "She won't last the year. The house will be ours by Christmas." They weren't whispering. They never do when they think you're finished. My husband had been in the ground for 6 hours. 6. The roses from his casket were still fresh in the foyer, and already my family was walking through the house like auctioneers. My grandson stuck colored tabs on furniture. "My cabin," he said, tagging the mahogany desk. "My wine room," my granddaughter added, scanning the dining room walls with a renovation app. No one asked if I wanted tea. No one asked if I was tired. They only asked each other who was taking what. And then my daughter-in-law smiled at me, the tight, polished smile she saves for charity events. "We've set up a little space for you downstairs," she said gently. Downstairs. The laundry room. There was a cot beside the utility sink, a flickering bulb overhead, a smell of bleach and damp socks. My bedroom upstairs, the one with 42 years of marriage in its walls, was already being emptied. I saw my silk scarves shoved into a box marked "sort later." I saw a sticky note on my jewelry case that read, "Vintage, maybe resale." That's what they'd reduced me to. An afterthought. A collection of items to be sorted and sold. That night they toasted in the dining room. I ate cold soup from a mug in the laundry room because they'd forgotten to leave me a plate. From upstairs, I heard my son say, "Dad built everything from nothing." And someone else answered, "Yeah, MOM just kept busy." They laughed. A sharp, dismissive sound that echoed off the concrete walls around me. But I didn't cry, because I knew something they didn't. 15 years ago, my husband's company was collapsing. Bankruptcy letters came in thick envelopes. He stopped sleeping, stopped shaving, stopped looking at me directly. "We just need liquidity," he muttered one night, staring at spreadsheets like they were a death sentence. Liquidity, such a clean, sterile word for raw panic. So I opened my cedar chest. Inside were the pieces I had brought into the marriage. My mother's sapphire necklace, gold bangles from my wedding day, diamond studs he'd given me on our 10th anniversary. I sold them quietly. No announcement, no martyr speech. I wired the money into the company's holding account before dawn. When he asked where it came from, I said only, "Does it matter?" The deal closed 3 days later. The company survived. They called him brilliant, self-made, a visionary. No one called me anything, and I let it stay that way. But there was something else. A week before the company went public, he was stuck. The investors hated his expansion model. He paced for nights, the floorboards groaning under the weight of his anxiety. So after he finally fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. I wrote a full restructuring strategy, supply chain adjustments, a pivot in the market approach. I even drew projected growth charts. You see, I had studied economics before I became someone's wife, before I became someone's mother. I signed the pages with a simple initial and mailed them anonymously to his office. He presented it 2 days later as a late-night breakthrough. That launch generated over $40 million in new capital. They hung his portrait in the lobby. Underneath it, a plaque read, "Built on bold thinking." I never corrected the record. I never transferred authorship. Crucially, I never signed away the intellectual property rights. I never cashed the quarterly royalties that quietly accumulated under the holding agreement. The legal framework remained tied to the original draft, my draft, because anonymity is not surrender, it's strategy. 5 days after they moved me into the laundry room, we all gathered at the attorney's office. My son sat tall, confident, practicing his signature on the edge of a legal pad. His wife whispered, "Paris in the spring." My grandson was scrolling through boat listings on his phone. They did not look at me. The attorney adjusted his glasses. "Before we proceed," he said calmly, "there is an addendum." I felt my son shift in his chair. Addendum was not a word he liked. A small recorder was placed on the table. My husband's voice, clear and steady, filled the room. "If my son disrespects his mother after my death, penalties apply." The room stilled. Each cruel comment, each dismissive action, had been assigned a financial deduction clause. My son turned pale. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. The attorney did not blink. "Remaining inheritance for Mr. Daniel Whitmore," he read, "is $4,200. Silence. My daughter-in-law's hand froze mid-reach for her purse. My grandson stopped breathing loud enough for everyone to hear it. Then the attorney turned to me. He slid a thick folder across the mahogany table. "To Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore." I opened it slowly. Deeds, transfers, royalty confirmations, and a letter in my husband's handwriting. On the single sheet of paper were just 6 words. "I knew. I always knew it was you." My son stared at me like he was seeing a stranger for the first time. "You," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Yes," I said. My voice did not shake. "Me." They were given 30 days to vacate the property. I did not shout. I did not insult them. I simply watched them pack. For the first time, no one laughed. As they were leaving, my son approached me on the porch. "I didn't know," he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. "You never asked," I replied, and that was the end of the conversation. I sold the house in the spring, not out of anger, but out of a need for closure. There were too many echoes in those walls, too many assumptions. I moved to a quiet coastal town where the mornings smell like salt and eucalyptus. The royalties continued to arrive. I kept enough to live comfortably. The rest funds a private grant I established for women whose work was credited to someone else. There are no galas, no press releases, just quiet corrections to history. On my refrigerator hangs a crayon drawing from years ago. A stick figure of me next to a giant light bulb. My grandson once wrote at the bottom, "Grandma thinks of everything." He forgot. But I didn't. They mistook my silence for weakness. They mistook my kindness for ignorance. They mistook my age for irrelevance. But I was never fading. I was documenting. And when the time came, I simply let the truth speak for itself. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been written out of your own story, remember this. You are not finished until you decide you are. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one holding the pen. Thanks for listening. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing for more.